Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to be looking at justifying multi-step equations. If we look at our essential question, it says, how are the field properties and properties of equality of real numbers used to solve equations? So from our previous video, we learned about our new properties of equality, and we're going to be using those today when we solve our equations. Let's start with an example. So we have our statement and our reason. So it's kind of set up like a two-column proof. You see this more in geometry, but we do use it for our solving and justifying equations. So if we look first, we have our given statement. So number one is given to us. Our second step would be to go through and distribute that -4. So we're taking that -4 and distributing it through. So to get from step 1 to step 2, we justify that by our distributive property. Our next step would be to subtract 24 from both sides. So we're subtracting 4 over here, and we're subtracting 24 on the other side. So that's going to be our subtraction property of equality. Now, going from step 3 to step 4, we see on one side we have positive 24 minus 24. We know any number plus its opposite is going to give us 0. So that's our additive inverse. But there's also a property happening on this side. We have 18 minus 24. We're taking 18 minus 24 and we're substituting in -6. Simplifying isn't a property. Combining like terms isn't a property. We want to make sure we're using substitution. So from step 3 to step 4, we have our substitution and additive inverse. Next, we would go through and divide both sides by -4. So we're dividing on both sides. That's our division property of equality. Our final step is, again, we're going to have two steps. So we notice on this side we have -4 divided by -6 divided by -4. And we're going to substitute in 3/2. Alright, so we have our substitution property happening on this side. Now over here we have -4, and we're multiplying it by -1/4. So we know when we go through and we multiply any number by its reciprocal, that's going to be our multiplicative inverse property. So to finish our equation, we have substitution and multiplicative inverse. Let's do another one. So now, again, we have our first statement, which is given to us, and that's our equation. If we go through next in our step 2, first thing we need to do is we're going to multiply both sides by 5. I'm going to do 5 times 7 equals to -x minus 8 over 5 multiplied by 5. So that's going to be justified by using our multiplication property of equality. We're multiplying both sides by 5. If I go through next to get from step 2 to step 3, I see 5 times 7. I'm going to substitute in 35 equals, we know we're taking 5 and think of it as multiplying it by 1/5. So we're using our multiplicative inverse on this other side to get -x minus 8. So this, we have our two properties we're using, and that's going to be substitution and our multiplicative inverse. Next, to get from step 3 to step 4, what we need to do is I'm going to add 8 to both sides. So I'm going to take 35 plus 8 equals to -x minus 8 plus 8. I'm adding 8 on both sides, so we know because of that it's going to be our addition property of equality. To get from step 4 to step 5, we're going to then use substitution on this side. We're taking 35 plus 8, and we're going to substitute in 43. And on this side we have negative 8 plus 8, and that's going to give us 0, and we're just left with negative x. So again, we have two properties. We have our substitution property and additive inverse. From step 5 to step 6 now, we see we have a negative x, and we don't want negative x. We want it to just be x. So I'm going to divide both sides by negative 1. So I have 43 divided by negative 1 equals to negative x divided by negative 1. So to justify that, we know that's going to be our division property of equality. Our last step, so step 7, we're going to substitute in 43 divided by negative 1 is going to be negative 43 equals, well, negative 1 divided by negative 1 is going to give us x. So we know that, again, we have substitution, and then we're using our multiplicative inverse property. Now try this one on your own. Make sure you have your statement and your reason. We're going to do one more together. This one's going to have a few more steps. So again, we have 1, and we know that that's given to us. Then, our next step, we're going to go and we're going to distribute that 5 through. So we know that that's going to be by our distributive property. Next, we see for step 3, we have a 5x and a 3x. So we're going to combine those. So we're going to take 5x plus 3x out, and we're going to substitute in 8x. So that's just going to be substitution. In our next step, we're going to take, we have 8x minus 20 equals 44, so we're going to add 20 to both sides. So we're adding 20 to both sides. That's our addition property of equality. We know that negative 20 plus 20, our additive inverse, that's going to give us 0. And then we're going to take 44 plus 20 and substitute in 64. So we know that that's going to be justified by our substitution property and our additive inverse. To get our sixth step now, we have 8x equals to 64. We're going to divide both sides by 8. So I'm going to divide both sides by 8. We know that that's our division property of equality. Now, to finish this off, we're going to take 8x divided by 8. We know that's our multiplicative inverse. 8 times 1/8, 8 times its reciprocal is just 1. And then 64 divided by 8 simplifies to 8. So that's our substitution and multiplicative inverse. Hopefully you start to see a pattern happening. If we use our addition or subtraction property of equality, afterwards it's going to be our additive inverse. If we use our division property or multiplication property of equality, after is going to be our multiplicative inverse to simplify it. Okay, you have one more try it problem, so make sure you bring both of these problems into class tomorrow.